I'm Brent Farris from the Man Studios, and I wanted to show you a bit about instantiating objects on the network. So you have prefabs, obviously, somewhere on your network. So I'm going to create a prefabs folder here. Prefabs. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a game object. So I'm going to create other. I'm going to create a sphere. Now this sphere, I'm going to set to 0, 0, 0. Fix my camera to be focused on it. Alright, so this sphere is going to be the game object I instantiate. So I'm going to give it some behavior. I'm going to give it a rigid body. And I'm also going to give it a particle system. Why? I'm not quite sure. But it's going to have a particle system, and its simulation space is going to be world, so I can move it around like that. Cool. Alright, so I'm going to stop that simulation. This is my prefab. I'm just going to drag that off into somewhere to make a prefab of it, destroy it from my scene, and I'm going to make it instantiate whenever I press the spacebar. So I'm going to create a script here. First I'm going to apply my network menu script to my camera so I can connect to a server. And then I'm going to create a script called create prefab on server. That's a big long name, but whatever. So my create prefab on server is going to have a socket for my prefab. So I'm going to create a public game object. I'm just going to call this, I don't know, prefab equals null. And then on private void update. So in my update, if I press the spacebar, if input dot get key down key code dot space. So if I press the space bar, then I'm going to instantiate the object, which I can do by this is how you would do it over the network. So if I'm on the network, I want to create the prefab by doing this. I do network dot instantiate. And then inside of this instantiate, I put in the prefab. This is kind of like GameObject.instantiate, except it has a group at the end, which I may explain in a subsequent video. But for now, let's get it working. So prefab is going to be my prefab. The position is going to be vector3.0. I want it to be at the 0 world. Even though that's where it is on the prefab, I gotta put it in as, I have to actually put it in for the network. I don't have the option to just call the prefab. I'm going to do quaternion.identity, which is an identity matrix. If you don't know what an identity matrix is, just look them up. It's basically, it looks like a diagonal set of ones. If you multiply anything by it, you kind of get the identity of it. Anyways, it's not a matrix video. It's a network instantiate video. And I'm going to set the group to 0. You will most commonly do 0, and we will explain these groups soon enough. So let's get it instantiating. This will instantiate on the server. Now, when I have this ready, first of all, I'm also going to only do this if I'm connected to the server. So if, here we'll just do, and what did I call it? Network menu dot connected. That's the connected variable we made in, I think, the last video tutorial with the chat system. So that is going to tell us if we're connected to the server or not, and if so, then we're going to do a network instantiate, only when we're connected. So I'm going to go to my prefab and drag the sphere into that socket right there. I'm going to build my game, build and run, overwrite my old demo. Alright, and now I'm going to host over here, I'm going to play, connect here. So over here I'm going to hit the spacebar. Notice it appears in both of the scenes, both the networking game here and here in the editor. And if I press spacebar in the editor, we're going to get a sphere on both of them as well. So what is the difference between these two objects? Let's look at them over here in the inspector. They are basically the same. What is missing is a network view. We don't have a network view attached to these guys. Basically, they're just simulating on both of them. They're not actually networked objects. So when we create it, it creates on both of the machines, and it simulates independently from the network and the player. Now, you may want to do that with lots of things, such as explosions and things like that, that aren't very important, that just need to happen. So with that, we're just going to set it up so with that, you would set it up so that you could instantiate just visual things that aren't important to the gameplay. So let's say these objects were important to the gameplay. Obviously, if they were, they would have a network view. So network view. So we're going to drop a network view on there. And the observed is going to be the sphere, reliable delta compressed, etc., etc. So if I were to run this, then they would be networked across there. So if I build and run, I'm actually going to take off the rigid body real quick. So I'm going to turn off the rigid body. Now I'm going to build and run. I'm going to do it for a reason, because I want to show you kind of ownership of objects before we do a tutorial on how to control independent objects and who owns what. So if I press spacebar over here, I create this object. And if I tried to move this object, say here in the editor, you're going to see that it does not move over here. However, if I created an object in the editor, and it's on top of this one, you can't see it, and I were to move it, it's going to move across the network. So the question is, why is it that I can move this one and it sees across the network, but I can't move this one and it see it across the network? Well, the answer is quite simple. This object was created on the internet, on the client here. This is the client here in the editor, and since the editor created this, it owns this object. Therefore, when I move it, it moves across the server because it's owned by the editor, because it's the client. This object was created by the server over here, which means that the server owns it. So if I try to move it over here on the client, it's not going to move on the server. So that's a introduction to the next video, which is going to be about the differences between, or how we can do things based on the client and server network view. So there we go. We've set this up, and that's how you can tell the difference between the two. And yeah, so be ready for the next video, and I hope this helped out.